This is Aaron Rice with Maryland Climate Tech 2026. So glad that you made it to this session. I'm here with a friend by the name of Pete with Johns Hopkins University. Pete, go ahead and introduce yourself. Let us know who you are, what you do, and where you do it.
So my name's Pete DeCarlo. I'm a professor of environmental health and engineering at Johns Hopkins University. I am a scientist and engineer, and the things that I've done for my career involve making measurements of air pollutants, sometimes gases, sometimes particles in the air that we breathe. And for a lot of my career, it's been focused on outdoor air because that's, where we regulate air quality. But I think the really important piece of this, and when I started doing indoor air quality about 15 years ago, in addition to the outdoor air quality that I continue to do, the reality is we spend over 90% of our time indoors. And a question I always like to ask students when I'm teaching and talks like this is take a beat and think, do I spend 2.5 or more hours outside per day? And if the answer is no, then you spend 90% of your time indoors. And that's typical for Americans. We typically spend more than 90% of our time indoors. The majority of time we spend in our bedroom sleeping. And so if you want to think about indoor air quality and where the most impact is, it's where we spend our time. Even if it's outdoor air pollution that we're worried about, how that gets into the indoor environment, how we can use buildings and homes to protect us from outdoor air pollution, is actually really important. And we have some tools to do that. And so that's something that we've started thinking about in my research group over the course of the last 10 or 15 years. And it's really important when we want to minimize our exposure to that air pollution that we see outside.
Absolutely. I always like to ask people if they've calculated their indoor age. Have you calculated yours yet?
I have not, but probably I'm 46, almost 47, and if
Times point
a,
nine, and that'll
a
give
third
you.
of my yeah, and a third of my day is spent in bed, my bedtime age is what, like 15 years?
Right, absolutely, absolutely. I think my indoor age is that we're basically talking about the amount of time that you spend inside of a home, a plane, train,
Yeah.
car, right, office, movie
Yep.
theater. I think mine is 50.4 years indoors, which I think is pretty crazy. I first heard you present at a planetary health event in DC at the Bloomberg School,
Hmm.
and you were talking about your research down in New Orleans and
Yeah.
otherwise known as Cancer Alley. And I think the one thing that really resonated with me is this map that you pulled up of from New Orleans to Baton Rouge in the antebellum years of all the sugarcane that
Hmm.
were planted on both sides of the Mississippi River. I think there's 500, 1,500 of them. If you've never
Hmm.
seen that map, I highly encourage you to Google it. I spent some time in New Orleans. I've got a big, 4 foot wide map of that. So
Hmm.
I immediately connected with you in that regard. But you talked about some of the indoor air quality research you were doing there and just how you can't really publicly talk about air quality down there. Can you talk a little about kind of what your experience was with being able to actually talk about publicly some of the research that you're doing and how dangerous that could have been?
Yeah, yeah. So Louisiana is an interesting place. It's that corridor between Louisiana, or in Louisiana between Baton Rouge and New Orleans is about 25% of the U.S. petrochemical refining and chemical industry is housed right there. And the map you're talking about is kind of the legacy of the plantations that lined the Mississippi River. And because getting access to the river was so important, they're very thin, narrow slices with connections to the Mississippi River, and those are now taken over by these large industrial facilities, um, which is a major economic driver for Louisiana. And so the state of Louisiana, along with two other states, introduced legislation, and it passed in Louisiana, and I believe it passed in Kentucky, that limits what community groups and others can do when they talk about air quality and air quality specifically that they're measuring. And so the state of Louisiana passed a law called CAMRA, the Community Air Monitoring and Responsibility Act. And so that limits the ability to talk about measurements that we make if it's not done with a government approved sensor. Keep in mind that government approved regulatory sensors are on the order of 30,000 or more dollars. And so they're completely inaccessible to a community group. The maintenance, the upkeep, and the labs that you often need to contract with to do those measurements are just not something that a typical community group is going to have access to.
Mm-hmm.
On the other end, my group, my team, we have what I call research grade instruments. So these aren't the ones that are used for regulatory monitoring. And I once made a comparison of, a high performance sports car to a police car, right?
Mm-hmm.
One is Mike, we use instruments that are going to be like the Bugattis of air quality measurement. And, regulatory instruments are more like the police cars. They're not going to go as fast. They're set for a specific purpose. But technically, I think we're not allowed to talk about our measurements either, unless we are very careful about talking about how accurate they are and tests that we do and really tracing back that data. The good news is we have to do that for peer review anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we publish a paper in the scientific literature, we've checked all those boxes. And so we talk about our measurements and some of the higher cancer risks that we find from our measurements that are not being seen using government measurements or government models.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, very interesting when you brought that up. So, bringing it back to Maryland, we've got our own kind of cancer alley as well, otherwise known as Curtis Bay, and the refineries that we have there, and the coal that's coming in there, and it's very detrimental to the community there. But our theme this year is housing is healthcare,
Hmm.
and we're focusing on the case for climate resilient, healthy homes. And the reason that I wanted to bring that to bear is because, we started with Baltimore Climate Tech Plus in 2024, focusing on the Maryland Climate Solutions Now Act, which is the most aggressive climate law in the nation. All of our buildings, 35,000 square feet or more, need to be net zero by 2040. And at that time, I hadn't bumped into many, and I still can say that today. I haven't bumped into many building owners nor corporate tenants that even know the law exists. And so we wanted to bring kind of an international perspective on building energy performance standards and how other organizations are dealing with that throughout the country, because it is kind of a spreading phenomenon.
Hmm.
But the biggest challenge that I'm seeing is that, a lot of these sustainability mandates and building energy performance standards, I'm always searching for, okay, well, where's the part about the health and wellness of the building occupant, right? I know we're trying to reduce greenhouse gases and be more resilient and save energy, which is all fine and dandy. But
Hmm.
we made a mistake in the 70s with the energy crisis. Sick building syndrome wasn't a thing before the 70s, right? We tightened up our buildings, we reduced the ventilation to cut back on energy, and that birthed the unintended consequence was sick building syndrome. And I feel like we're kind of headed that way again with these building energy performance standards. I think the engineers think that no offense to the engineers out there, but I think that they think that if we just electrify the buildings, take away the combustibles, clean indoor air comes along for the ride. And I know I measure air quality wherever I go. I have these little, high quality consumer grade uh, um, monitors, and I've been into net zero buildings. I've been into
Hmm.
all electric buildings. I've been in buildings that have gold, silver, platinum plaques, and the air quality sucks in all of them. I'm
Hmm.
surprised when I'm in a building that actually performs well. And I will say the building that performs the best, and I'll ask you this question as well, is 100 International Drive, where the Carey Business School is, at the Legg Mason Tower. It used to be called Legg Mason Tower. There in Harbor East, I think is the healthiest building in the country. I spent about 8,500 hours there on the 23rd floor, monitoring air quality 7 days a week. It was superb. How can we, make sure that public health has a seat at the table when we're talking about building energy performance standards and making sure we're not getting back into or continuing this sick buildings syndrome phenomenon?
That's a fantastic question. And, I think that is also near and dear to my heart. The push for energy efficiency and tightening of buildings, um, and trying to basically recirculate as much air as possible so that you're not having to condition either heat or cool that air, um, has not been great for indoor air quality. And metrics for indoor air quality often are just CO2 levels.
Hmm.
But the reality is there's so many other chemicals, especially volatile organic compounds,
Hmm.
that may have detrimental health impacts that are not being measured that you want to ventilate out. You want to
Mhm.
get rid of those um, to protect the health of the people who are in that building. And so I'm in 100% agreement that we need to have not only energy efficiency ratings for buildings to give approval for whatever designation we prefer, but there have to be good metrics for the health of the or the health how healthy is the air
Mhm.
in addition to the energy savings, because it's not just about energy. If people get sick going to work, that's a massive problem economically. Um, and so I think there absolutely has to be a seat at the table. I think one thing COVID also highlighted was the importance of clean air from a pathogen standpoint.
Mhm.
And so, the day to day, I think, are the chemicals that are in buildings, in the air, in the materials that we use in buildings. And so making sure that we have low emitting carpets or chairs or whatever comes into the building, those will off gas. We smell them. But there are times of the year when everyone's got the flu, like we're just kind of getting out of like massive flu season.
Mhm.
We also need to think about how do we get rid of pathogens in indoor air. And so if COVID did anything for indoor air quality, it really highlighted the importance of thinking about that filtration and killing viruses. But it's not just that, it's also the outdoor air pollution that comes in. It's the off-gassing of the materials in the building that also need to be considered when we designate buildings as um, efficient or healthy or LEED standards.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear, just more conversations about indoor air quality because when's the last time we've seen anything on the news about indoor air quality, right? In isolated spaces like Cancer Alley in New Orleans or in Curtis Bay, I don't know about you, but I mean, in general terms, when there's not a forest fire in Canada, the air quality in Baltimore is improved, right?
Yeah.
But I think the challenging time is when we do have a forest fire from wildfires from Canada and have high levels of particulate matter, or you're in a Curtis Bay or you're in a New Orleans in and around Cancer Alley, 70% of that outdoor air we're actually breathing indoors. And so, my research says, and maybe you could speak on this a little bit, the air particles that are coming in from outdoors that mix with the air particles that we're generating indoors from our cooking or burning candles or something like that creates this new molecule that's just, we don't know what's going on. Can you address that a little bit?
Yeah. No, this is the kind of research questions that we've really been trying to address over time. And then maybe I want to take a step back and just say there are different, and you're aware of this, I'm sure, but your home, if it's a single story home, and a managed airflow in a building are different, right? So I'm currently in my office, and the building that I'm in has a HVAC or heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system that actively draws in air from outside. It filters it, it conditions it, and then it distributes it to all the offices and
Probably
labs in
got
the
MERS
building.
13 filters, very high-end stuff.
I wish it did. No, we haven't. I'm in an older building, so
Okay.
we have like a MERV 8, maybe a MERV
Oh, wow.
10,
Okay.
which is not great, and that's why I didn't do our studies here. There is a more modern building on Hopkins campus that we've done a bunch of actually HVAC studies in,
Mhm.
because we're really interested in this question. And actually, my PhD student who's been working on that is defending on Friday this
Oh, wow.
week.
Okay.
So just in a few days. Um, but that's a much more modern building. It's much more managed. And we have a MERV 10 and a MERV 15. So MERV 10 pre-filter and a MERV 15 main filter.
Mhm.
And so that building, when the air that it draws into the building and then distributes, removes over 85% of the particles, the particulate matter that would then get distributed. And so the indoor concentrations of particulate matter from outside are down much lower. Now it's not down to 15% of outside. And why is it not down to 15% of outside? Because of infiltration. People coming in and out of the building, how tight the building is. We find that actually over half of the particulate matter in the occupied spaces of the building is coming from infiltration. And so it's a small amount of air that gets in, but that air hasn't been filtered down to 15% like the stuff that's coming in through the HVAC system. And so in a modern building, most of the particulate matter that you're breathing didn't make it through the HVAC system. It made it in through the doors and the windows and the cracks in the building. Now, our homes, where we spend a lot of our time, are a different matter. I live in a single family home. It's an old home. It's over 100 years old now. I think it turned 100 last year. Um, it's leaky, right? In the central air that we have in our home, um, doesn't pull in from outside. It just recirculates what's in the home, and it relies on that air sneaking in through the cracks and the windows and the doors to kind of replenish and refresh that air. And so about half of the my home, and I've done this measurement, my wife loves that I bring instruments home. Um, about half.
You bring the Bugatti level instruments home. That's different.
I think she might draw the line at that when I I start putting a few kilowatts of power into our home. Um, but the particulate matter in my home, if we're not cooking, if we're not cleaning, if we're not making our own particles, is about half of what it is outside.
Hmm.
Um, in the managed building, it's about 20% of what's outside. And so you can see that if you have better technology, more modern buildings, you can really reduce that exposure to outdoor air pollution. So the wildfires and the smoke in that modern building is going to be 20% of what's outside. My home, without any kind of intervention and no indoor sources, is about 50% of what's outside. And then on top of that, I could put in air cleaners. Corsi Rosenthal boxes, for people who have seen those, are these box fans with filters attached to it and duct taped on so that you can reduce and you can recirculate and filter out air. That helps to reduce that burden indoors as well. But these are ways that the buildings can protect us from outdoor air pollution, and also where that stuff is coming, and how a home is different than a managed building.
Very great points. When I was at the Legg Mason Tower, otherwise known as the Franklin Templeton Building now at 100 International Drive in Harbor East, I would, like I said, I had my air quality monitor with me everywhere. I bring it in my car. It probably would be, 900 parts per million carbon dioxide. I'd bring it into the building. 12 minutes later, it dropped to like 520. So it proved what I learned from Dr. Joseph Allen from his Healthy Buildings book, that a building can make you well or it can make you sick, right?
Yep.
And the majority of buildings, unfortunately, are making us sick because, especially the ones that have all the environmental certifications, um, no one's validated on the back end
Yeah.
that we're actually getting what we paid for, right? Okay, you say that you use low to no volatile organic compounds in your building materials. Like, who's validating on the back end, right? You say that you've earned a plaque and you checked a couple of boxes on the air quality. I think it's line 16 in the lead form. But who's actually validating, past the flush out phase? So I think it's a big
Mhm.
challenge. Um, how are you, you're more on the academic side. I'm more on the, for profit, working nonprofit, doing more social impact side. So I'm having to make more business cases of why this is important. I don't know if you're having to do that, make a business case as to why someone would want to really investigate indoor air quality, but how do you make that argument in your world?
I mean, I think it starts with what we talked about at the very beginning, is your indoor age, right? And how much of your time do you spend indoors? And
Hmm.
so, I've studied outdoor air pollution now for over 20 years, and we always justify our study because 8 million people die per year from exposure to air pollution.
Hmm.
About half of that is due to bad indoor air pollution in countries that are still economically developing, and people burn solid fuels to heat or cook in their homes, and that leads to really high levels of indoor air pollution. The other half is exposure to high levels of outdoor air pollution, and that's why we regulate outdoor air pollution. But again, if you're breathing the outdoor air pollution indoors,
Right.
how we protect ourselves indoors is really important for minimizing our exposure.
Hmm.
Um, and so if I can get my home in my like during wildfires, I'll set up an indoor air filter in my home
Hmm.
so that my kids are protected, my wife and I are protected from higher levels. And we have some ability to control the smaller volume of indoor space that we occupy for the majority of our time.
Yeah, I would say that the building that I was in at it houses the Cary Business School. They use MERV 16 filters,
Yeah.
which is actually pretty good. And then even on Sundays, they turn off the HVAC system just to kind of conserve energy. And even then, I was measuring in the high fours parts per million. And outdoor air is like good outdoor air is between 4 and 500 parts per million on carbon dioxide. So felt like I was breathing outdoor air indoors on a Sunday when the HVAC system was turned off, which I thought was absolutely amazing. So, we do this. We got a small grant from BGE, our local, utility, to do what we
Mhm.
call a 30-day healthy home checkup, where we're, taking a prosumer grade, high quality, low cost air quality monitor, so reset accredited monitor, and putting them in people's homes for 30 days just to measure, radon and asthma triggers.
Mhm.
And it's very interesting to see the data that we're collecting. We're going to do 100 homes this year. We've already done probably a couple dozen. I can pull up my cell phone and go through and see how each individual properties are performing. We get an alert if particulate matter should spike or radon should spike, and then we can
Mhm.
text the occupant of the home, kind of, hey, here's what's going on. Here's some kind of low to no cost mitigation strategies for you. But it's very interesting in regards to just how consumers react to the data that's coming in. For some, it's overwhelming. For some, it's just like, I don't want to know.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because we're measuring homes that have radon mitigation systems that aren't performing properly. We're dispelling myths about, all electric homes, because it's all electric, the air quality is good. No. We're
Yeah.
finding homes that have gas stoves that perform better than all electric homes as well. So it's very interesting once you get into some of these properties and
Mhm.
see what's going on. Talk to me a little bit about kind of the psychology of indoor air quality, like, and how people perceive these notifications they might get about how their home or their building is performing.
That's a great question, and I think it comes down to what people understand air quality to be. Um, and this is true for outdoor air quality too, but odors are things people want to avoid, right? And so it drives me nuts, but people who are obsessed with essential oils and
Mm,
have every room have a different scent, those are VOCs.
yeah.
Those can react to form particles when ozone from outdoors comes in and reacts with those compounds that give those smells.
Mhm.
Um, but the perception is because I've got eucalyptus smell, I have good indoor air quality. But
Or
the
I
reality
can't
is,
I can't see it, smell it, or taste it, so it must be fine.
yeah,
Right.
that's another thing. And then um, cooking, which is I love to cook.
Hmm.
I'm
Me
it's
neither.
one of my happy places.
Yeah.
But I also know that cooking generates particulate matter
Hmm.
depending on what I'm cooking or how I'm cooking.
Hmm.
So if you're boiling pasta, it's not really producing particles. But if you're frying, um, what are my kids like? They like little, we call them shark bait. It's fried fish, like but breaded and fried fish, and that generates a lot of particulate matter, and that's cooking oil that's just getting aerosolized from that cooking process. And so you want to make sure that you have, if you have it, a vent hood that vents outside going when you're doing these types of things, and that reduces the impact of the cooking activities. And I'm not going to tell people not to cook. I think it's really important that we cook healthy foods and we know what's going in our food. Um, but that's one of the main sources if you're not smoking of indoor particles. And so I don't like to have fires in my home. We have a wood stove that came with the house. We've used it one time in the 5 years we've lived in our home because that's a major source of indoor particulate matter and outdoor particulate matter that can then get back
For
into
me.
your
Yeah.
home.
Hmm.
We did a project actually in Fairbanks, Alaska. So I don't want to divert too much, but um, in Fairbanks in the wintertime, they're often outside of air quality regulations for particulate matter. And that has to do with it being really dark, really cold. And when it gets super cold, the heating systems that people have in their homes often can't keep up. And so they supplement by burning wood or wood
Hmm.
pellets. And so the outdoor concentrations, when it gets to minus 40 degrees, spike, and you get what's called out of attainment for outdoor particulate matter. Um, but the housing standards are really good in Fairbanks because you can't, if you want to try to keep a house warm enough to live in when it's minus 40 out, it has to be really tight. And so the building standards for homes, for personal homes, are much more strict than we have in Maryland. That also means that if you're burning wood or pellets and you have any infiltration or leakage from that stove into your home, you're building up those particulate levels in your home and it's not ventilating easily because your home's really tight. And so in this study, we found that a brand new installed wood pellet boiler for the home wasn't had a leak somewhere, and it was some fraction of that smoke that most of it went outside was coming into the home and leading to really high indoor concentrations. And so avoiding our sources of particulate matter indoors is really important if we want to protect our health. And thinking about where the sources are coming from and people's perceptions of I like to have a fire around Thanksgiving or Christmas or whenever, what that means to your indoor air quality.
Absolutely. So I've got a tough but necessary question. I didn't share these questions in advance. Maybe I should have, but in 2024 and the preceding years, Baltimore was the second highest rate of asthma-related fatalities in the nation, with African American women 4 times more likely to die from asthma than white men, and African American children 6 times more likely to die than white children. On September 9th, 2025, the Association of the Asthma and Allergy Foundation put out their 2025 report, and Baltimore went from number 2 to number 1 city in the country for asthma-related fatalities. And oftentimes, I think people, when they hear that stat, they're like, "Well, you got Johns Hopkins, you got University of Maryland, you got UMBC, you got all these higher levels of institution. You've got the Breathe Center, you've got academia researchers working on this problem, but it doesn't seem to be moving the needle. What's missing? What's missing from that conversation? What could we do more moving forward with community and academia on this issue?"
Oh, that's a tough question. And I I had asthma growing up. So
Mm,
I understand the um how difficult it is to not be able to breathe
mm,
and look for your medicine and have to take it and take deep breaths. And it's awful. And I don't want anyone to have to go through that. And so it's something that we definitely need to fix.
mhm,
Asthma triggers differ for different people. Um, I grew up in Indiana, and I think for me, a lot of it may have had to do with a lot of the agricultural activity in the area around the town that I grew up in. Because as I moved away, my asthma triggers went away, and then I'd come back home to visit, and I'd get asthma again. So there was something either about the area or maybe even my home that I grew up in that was problematic. Um, but I think the other piece to this is Baltimore has a lot of these medical centers that you're talking about in the Breathe Center, but we also have a lot of housing that was built a very long time ago.
the more historic
Um,
architecture than New York and DC combined. Yeah.
yeah, and I lived in Philly before I lived in Baltimore, and I lived in row homes,
Hmm.
and some of them were over 100 years old.
Hmm.
And if they're not kept up properly, then you have water infiltration.
Hmm.
And in a changing climate, we're going to have more intense rains. Even one that is kept up, you can get leakage. And so one of the triggers for a lot of people for asthma is mold
Yeah.
and mold spores. And so if you have a bunch of really old housing that has a tendency of having water come in, and we have climate change happening where we're getting more intense rainfall that is likely going to lead this older housing to have more water
Hmm.
infiltration,
Hmm.
you have the perfect conditions for mold growth in unoccupied spaces of the building that talk via air to the occupied spaces of the building. And that can be a low level trigger for many people for asthma. And so I think very much the discussion about indoor air quality has to also talk about the impact on asthma
Hmm.
and how we better maintain our housing. Or, the reality is we may not be able to retrofit everything.
Hmm.
We may need to invest in building new modern housing that is protective and think about the things we've been talking about, not just energy efficiency, but how do we maintain good indoor air quality in addition to being energy efficient?
Healthy, smart, high performance homes. I
Yes.
think that's the way to go because
For cheap,
unlike
for cheap.
yeah, right. Affordable, right? And I think I was listening to somebody at the International Builder Show who did a national survey, and they said that buyers think that affordability is $158,000, which is interesting. I think that was the average sales price in Baltimore City prior to COVID. No longer. But yeah, I think building healthy, smart, high performance homes because if you focus on the health and wellness of the occupant, the energy efficiency and the decarbonization, the resiliency, sustainability, that comes along for the ride. But if you
Mhm.
focus on just energy, then all you got is energy. All you got is net zero in a box that unfortunately is not serving the occupant if it's not monitored and validated.
Yeah.
So I guess my next question is just about radon and how come it doesn't get a proper seat at the table? 1 in 4 homes in Maryland has levels above the EPA action limit of 4 picocuries per liter. I come to this space from, I mentioned earlier, reading Dr. Joseph Allen's Healthy Building book,
Mhm.
and he talked about, radon comes from granite countertops. We're like, oh, shit, we just put granite countertops in our home. We just renovated our home. And it was like, oh no. So I went out and bought the monitor, and lo and behold, we had high levels of radon. That had nothing to do with the granite countertops, more to do with where we live in Randallstown, that has a lot of quarries, a lot of granite quarries, streets named Granite. My wife and I always joke driving home from travels and counting all the mitigation systems on different homes. So, we since got our home mitigated, but, so 1 in 4 homes have high levels of radon. Radon kills 58 people a day in the United States. You can't see it, can't smell it, can't taste it. Um, but it's not getting a proper seat at the table. I know that a lot of organizations do these, environmental, wellness checks at homes where they're checking for asthma triggers and those types of things, but very rarely is radon tested. Why do you think radon's not getting an equal seat at the table in regards to both measuring and proper mitigation and all buildings, not just
Mhm.
homes?
I mean, that's a great question. Um, and I'll confess it's not something that I study heavily, but it's something that I have thought a little bit about.
Mhm,
And, radon is higher in certain areas, and we know which areas have the highest likelihood of having radon. Um, when we moved to Baltimore from Philly, we got the house that we eventually bought checked for radon.
mhm,
Without, this conversation today makes me think we should probably check again, just as a matter of course. But the reality is most people may or may not get that check done when they purchase a home,
mhm,
and probably never again once they own the home.
mhm.
And that's a problem. Maybe we do need to be more proactive about thinking about the potential for radon. And part of it is you pour a slab in the basement if you have a basement, right? And that slab may not be perfect over the lifetime of the home, right?
Right,
You get cracks, you get infiltration. That's how the radon gets in, right?
right. Mhm.
And so knowing that there's wear and tear in these homes, knowing that, your foundation, while still stable, may no longer be airtight,
Mhm.
we need to think about what that means for radon. And so, yeah, I mean, now you're making me think I should go home and call a contractor and have them come in and do a radon test.
Well, yeah. Well, we've got another cohort starting up pretty quickly for our 30-day healthy home checkup. There's no cost. You live in the BGE area, I'm
I
assuming.
do. I
You
do,
paid
yes.
BGE bill, so yeah, we'll drop a monitor in there, and then these we say we monitor for radon. We don't test for radon, like we monitor for it. If we see something that spikes, we'll definitely recommend you get a second opinion.
Yeah.
But we're talking to everybody about doing this, and I guess that makes me want to kind of geek out really quickly about kind of how you have your home set up in regards to air quality. What type of monitors are you using? Are you using air purifiers, using the Corsi box? Do you have you graduated to a more formal air purifier? What do you got? Okay, all right.
Oh, oh no, it's stuck.
Sounds like it's hardwired.
Um,
Okay, all right. You got-
every sorry for the walking away. Every
That's
year
okay.
I teach an undergrad environmental engineering course, and we build a Corsi Rosenthal box.
Hmm.
Um, when we talk about particulate matter and cleaning and air exchange and all these things, and then I fill my office with particulate matter using an ultrasonic humidifier, which
Hmm.
basically just aerosolizes all the undissolved solids in tap water. And we can kind of get a steady state of PM in my office, and then we can turn the box on and see how low it drops. And to do that, we use some fancy sensors, but I also use these are the Aware
Okay.
sensors.
Yep. Yep.
Um, but I had to develop a lab during COVID for students to do since they couldn't come into do work in labs. We were restricted in how many people could be in a space at a time. And so I bought 16 of those awares and had them, designed an experiment for them to use. And so now I have a few in my home too, which is kind of fun. So if I'm cooking like Thanksgiving, there's a lot of cooking activities. There's the baking, the
Yep.
cooking,
Yep.
frying,
Brussels sprouts and
and
everything.
so exactly. And Brussels sprouts can make some particulate matter if you let them burn a little bit.
Absolutely.
Um, and if you have them in different places in your house, you can kind of see how the kitchen is the epicenter
Mhm,
and
mhm.
how that air eventually dilutes and travels through the rest of your home. And so I've done that a few times to kind of have fun. My wife got mad at me for having five sensors in the house at one point, so I've narrowed it down to two. But you know, doing
Yeah.
science at home is
Yeah, my
easy.
wife was the same way. The radon thing, you can handle that. And shouts out to Dr. Rich Horsey and his box and everything that he's done. So we use the Air Things
Okay.
Reset accredited monitor. Aware has a Reset accredited version. We only use Reset accredited, indoor monitors. We don't use the Bugatti versions. But this one does have a radon sensor in it,
Oh, nice.
which is a benefit. Knowing what I know about radon, that's always something that we can't skip. And folks, if your building touches the ground, it has radon. I can already tell you,
Yeah.
I've never measured a building that has zero. But yeah, so we have one of these on every level. We live in a townhome here in Randallstown, and they say when you test for radon, you should put it in the lowest finished level of the home. I didn't know any
Mhm.
better at the time. I read Dr. Allen's book. He said that radon can get into your air ducts. Since you said in the beginning you spend the most amount of your time in your bedroom, I said I'll put it in the bedroom. And so we had extremely high levels in the bedroom, and then we got it mitigated. I mean, we were at 20 picocuries per liter, which is smoking 20 to 40 cigarettes a day. We've been here for 25 years. And our
Mhm.
son, who just recently graduated from Towson, he lives in the lower level of the home, so like he's getting it first. Luckily, we got it mitigated in time. No one's feeling any effects of it, but so we have one of these on each level, and we've dispelled the myth of put it in the lowest finished level because the numbers are all different on all three floors. Like sometimes
Yeah.
it could be higher in the bedroom, sometimes it could be higher in the basement area. It just depends. And then we've got air purifiers as well. We always keep our windows kind of cracked at least an inch. We've
Mhm.
gone into homes, and I ask people, what we do a quick survey, does your hood fan vent to the outdoors? Yes. If it does, very lucky. Mine does
Yeah.
not at my home. If you have a home that vents to the outdoors, that's great. What
Mhm.
type of filters are you using? How often are you changing your air filters? How often do you open your windows? And I've got people like, I never open my windows. I'm like, why? It's like, because the outdoor air is the devil. I'm like, a crack won't hurt. Like, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know I could. Okay, how do I open my window? I've had people actually, I had to figure out and teach them how to open their window.
Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting. But my assumption is that you're not doing much in home monitoring. You're monitoring more commercial spaces, I'm assuming.
I mean, I do a little. I have the awares in my home,
Okay.
and
I mean, I mean, as a
but
profession.
as a profession, so it depends on the project.
Uh,
We've spent a lot of time doing more commercial HVAC. And even though we spend the most amount of time in our homes, when you think about like I teach classes, right? And I can have 10 or 15 students in one room for
mhm,
an hour.
mhm,
And so the integrated person time for that hour is 15 or 16 if you include me.
mhm,
Um, and so managing those spaces is also can be really important.
mhm,
Whereas at home, my wife and I in the bedroom for 8 hours, that's the same level of person hour exposure.
mhm.
I have more control over what I can do in my home.
Right.
And so we're very interested in that space too. But I've done a mix. The Fairbanks project was a residential home that we're making measurements in.
Mhm,
Here at Hopkins, we've got the HVAC system in one of the modern classroom buildings that we've been making measurements in. Um, and we did a test house in Texas. I was part of a big collaborative.
mhm.
That was when Rich Coursey was actually at UT before he moved to UC Davis. And so yeah, it's been a mix, and I think there's definitely benefits to doing both and understanding the differences between how you do a managed forced air system that brings in air from outside versus one in your home that more is a recirculating air system.
Excellent. Pete, this has been great, man. I really appreciate your time and the work that you're doing. Keep it up. And is there anything that I didn't ask you that people should know about yourself or the work that you're doing?
Um, no, no, I think try to minimize the indoor sources. I guess one thing that we didn't talk about too, that is a kind of an interesting science nerdy question is the your homes have a memory
Mm,
and buildings have a memory. And this is something we learned when we were studying a classroom at Drexel before I moved to Hopkins. Um, there's residues that build up on indoor surfaces. And those residues serve as a reservoir for chemicals that can keep coming out. Um, and so while the classroom building I was in had a smoking ban for 30 years, we found chemical traces of smoking when we were making measurements in this classroom. And it turns out that it's probably due to a couple of research scientists who were heavy smokers. And they'd go outside and they'd have a cigarette and then they'd come back to their office. And you could smell, right? If you can smell smoke on a person, that means it was on their clothes and now it's getting into the air.
mhm,
And once it's in the air, it can go to a wall and it can
mhm,
sit on the wall. And so the buildup of these people going outside and smoking over a period of time led to their office basically being a residue covered with off-gassing of cigarette smoke. And because we're on a shared ventilation system,
mhm.
what happens in one room happens in all the rooms. This isn't
Right,
Vegas. This
right.
is an HVAC system that has shared air. And so it was a really interesting finding that the chemical residue of them going outside and smoking ended up in all of the offices and classroom buildings that shared that HVAC system. And so if you can smell it, if you light a fire or have fire in your home and you smell that smoke for a couple days, that's the residue of that smoke that has gotten on the walls, in your couch, in your carpet, that is going to slowly off gas. And so one thing that's really interesting is I also sit on this, it's called third hand smoke,
Mhm,
uh, is what that chemical residue is called. And I help advise California's Third Hand Smoke Research Consortium. And one of the things they did, which is actually really interesting, is they now have a law in California that you have to disclose whether or not the house has been smoked in. So just like you have to disclose lead paint in housing disclosures and things like
Radon in
that,
Montgomery County.
and radon, now in California, you also have to disclose the
Wow.
history of smoking in the house,
Wow.
which is important when you think about healthy indoor spaces, healthy
Hmm.
homes.
Hmm.
And that residue that can last, it gets into the insulation behind the drywall and off gases over a really long period of time.
Hmm.
And that's not something you want your kids to be exposed to.
Right.
So I guess that's one thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about, but that's really important when we think about these spaces that we spend the majority of our lives in.
Sounds like the title of a coming book. Your home has a memory.
It's interesting. I
Ready
like
here
it.
first.
Yeah.
Hey, Pete, this has been great, man. Thank you so much for your time and your subject matter expertise. I really appreciate you joining us and making time for us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Have a great day.
You too.